You begin by stepping into the world of the Vikings, a people often romanticized in popular culture. The first thing to clear up, the horned helmets are pure myth. The Vikings did not wear them into battle. The image comes from 19th century operas and costume designers. Instead, Viking clothing was practical, functional, and symbolic. It reflected climate, resources, status, and occupation. Imagine the Scandinavian landscape, cold, wet, and often windswept. Survival required careful attention to warmth and protection. Clothing was the first line of defense against frost, rain, and wind. For both men and women, garments were layered. Underneath, a tunic or shirt made of linen or wool touched the skin, soft against the body but strong enough to withstand daily labor. Over this, heavier wool tunics, cloaks, and sometimes leather aprons protected from chill and rain. The materials were sourced from sheep, goats, and flax cultivated in gardens or along river banks. Animal hides were used for boots, gloves, and capes. For the Vikings, clothing was a marker of identity. A well-made cloak with decorative brooches could signify wealth or status. Simple, coarse garments might indicate a laborer or farmer. The society was hierarchical, and these visual signals were immediately legible to the community. Functional clothing did not exclude ornamentation. Even everyday garments might include decorative stitching, small metal clasps, or dyed trims. In the Viking world, mobility and function were crucial. Men working the fields or sailing needed clothes that allowed free movement. Women involved in household tasks or tending animals required garments that could accommodate bending, lifting, and handling tools. Yet, ceremonial attire, often richer in color, made with finer fabric, and adorned with metalwork, was worn for feasts, religious rituals, or visits from nobility. Travelers and warriors layered their garments to adapt to harsh weather. Cloaks fastened with pins or brooches could be removed when warm or kept on during storms. Wool offered insulation, while linen absorbed moisture and allowed ventilation. Footwear was simple but sturdy, typically made of tanned leather with soft soles for comfort and flexibility. By understanding the purpose behind these garments, you can begin to see the balance Vikings struck between practicality, comfort, and expression. Every stitch, every clasp, every fold of fabric served a purpose, whether functional, social, or symbolic. This series will now explore each element of Viking clothing, beginning with the materials themselves, how they were produced, and how Vikings adapted them to the demands of daily life, battle, and ceremony. Step by step, you will see the reality of Viking attire emerge, far richer and more sophisticated than the myths suggest. Step into the Viking world and imagine the textures beneath your fingers, the fabrics that made up daily life. The Vikings' clothing was never just about fashion. It was a reflection of climate, geography, social structure, and available resources. Understanding the materials they used is the key to appreciating how their clothes functioned and how the people who wore them lived. The primary materials for Viking garments were wool, linen, and animal skins with smaller amounts of other natural fibers. Wool was perhaps the most essential. Sheep were raised widely across Scandinavia, from the rocky hills of Norway to the lush pastures of Denmark. Wool served many purposes. It could be spun, dyed, woven, and layered. Coarse wool provided durable outerwear for the harsh weather, while finer wool, though rarer, offered softer tunics and cloaks for the wealthier classes. Wool had natural insulating properties, and when layered, it trapped air and warmth, making it invaluable during the bitter winters. The Vikings were adept at spinning and weaving wool into cloth suitable for both utility and display. The fibers were carded and spun using simple drop spindles or, in wealthier households, a walking wheel, producing threads of varying thickness depending on the intended use. Linen came from flax, which the Vikings cultivated themselves. Linen was light, breathable, and often worn directly against the skin. A linen undertunic or shirt kept the body comfortable by absorbing sweat and allowing movement without chafing. Flax was a labor-intensive crop. The stems had to be harvested, retted to loosen the fibers, and then spun into thread. Despite the work involved, linen was prized for its smoothness and comfort. Wealthy individuals could even afford linen dyed in pale, soft colors, which became an indicator of social status, as such fabrics were more difficult to maintain and required careful handling. Animal hides and furs were critical for outerwear, footwear, and warmth. Wolves, bears, reindeer, and domesticated animals provided pelts that were tanned into leather or worn as furs. Leather shoes, gloves, and belts were common, often left plain for function, but sometimes decorated with stamping or tooling to indicate status. Fur was used sparingly, often in lining cloaks, collars, or capes because high-quality pelts were expensive and labor-intensive to process. A fur-lined cloak was a luxury that combined warmth with prestige. While wool, linen, and leather formed the backbone of Viking clothing, the Vikings were also influenced by trade networks. Imported materials, such as silk or fine cotton, were available to the wealthiest and often used for ceremonial garments, particularly for women in noble households. Silk, for instance, was rare and treasured, sometimes appearing as trims on dresses or as handkerchiefs. This connection to distant lands, through trade with Byzantium, the Middle East, or even the Islamic world, brought fabrics that added color, texture, and status symbols into the Viking wardrobe. Natural dyes played an important role in the appearance of Viking clothing. Many Vikings preferred bright colors, which were achieved through plants, insects, and minerals. Woad and indigo produced shades of blue, while madder root yielded red tones. Yellows came from weld or birch leaves. Dark greens could be achieved by overdying yellow and blue fabrics. Rich, saturated colors were often reserved for the elite because the dyeing process required time, knowledge, and expensive materials. Ordinary peasants typically wore muted colors, natural shades of undyed wool and linen, browns, grays, and off-whites, which were practical, easily repaired, and harder to soil visibly. The texture and weave of fabrics was also significant. Coarse, thick wool was used for outer garments because it was durable and weather-resistant. It could be felted to make it windproof or woven more loosely to allow ventilation in milder months. Finer wool or linen, tightly woven, was used for undergarments and ceremonial wear. Patterns such as stripes or simple geometric weaves could appear in tunics, while wealthier individuals might display complex braids or dyed stripes as a sign of craftsmanship and taste. Vikings also adapted layering techniques to optimize the use of these materials. The base layer, typically linen, kept the skin dry. Over it, wool tunics added warmth. Cloaks, capes, or aprons served as outer layers against rain, wind, or snow. Belts and brooches held the layers together, and fur or leather linings added insulation. This careful layering allowed the Vikings to survive extreme cold weather in a longhouse in Iceland, a Norwegian fjord, or during travel across frozen rivers. Footwear and headwear were directly tied to the available materials. Shoes were generally soft leather, sometimes lined with wool for warmth. For colder climates, boots could rise higher, laced tightly to keep out snow. Hats and hoods were also made of wool or fur, often simple caps for daily work or more elaborate hoods for nobles, sometimes decorated with embroidery or metalwork. These items were not just functional. They communicated identity, occupation, and social standing. Another key consideration was durability and repair. Vikings could not afford to discard clothing frequently. Scraps of cloth were mended with meticulous stitching. Leather could be oiled to prevent cracking. Wool could be patched, felted, or repurposed. This practice of careful maintenance made clothing last for years and contributed to the distinctive practical aesthetic of Viking life. In summary, Viking clothing materials were an intricate balance of practicality, resourcefulness, and social expression. Wool provided warmth and protection. Linen offered comfort and breathability, and leather and fur ensured durability. Imported fabrics and dyes added status and decoration. Layering and repair strategies maximized the utility of each item, allowing the Vikings to endure harsh climates while maintaining their cultural identity. By understanding the fibers, dyes, and treatments that created their garments, you can start to visualize a Viking not as a figure of fantasy with horned helmets, but as a skilled, practical, and resourceful individual who used the materials at hand to craft clothing suited to survival, labor, and status. Every garment told a story about the wearer, their social position, and the community they belonged to. As we move forward in this series, the next chapters will examine underclothes, tunics, shirts, and the ways Vikings combined these materials into wearable outfits, revealing the artistry and ingenuity behind every stitch, fold, and layer. Step by step, the reality of Viking clothing will emerge, dispelling myths and painting a detailed portrait of daily life, travel, and ceremony in this fascinating society. Imagine stepping into a Viking longhouse in the early morning. Smoke drifts from the hearth, and the first rays of sunlight pierce the small windows. Your hands reach for the garment that will touch your skin for the entire day, the undertunic. This is the foundation of every Viking outfit, the first layer that combines comfort, warmth, and modesty. For both men and women, the undertunic was typically made of linen, spun from locally grown flax. Linen was light, breathable, and soft against the skin, essential in a climate that could range from bitter cold to damp chill. A linen shirt or tunic allowed air to circulate while absorbing sweat, keeping the wearer dry during laborious tasks. These undergarments were rarely adorned with decoration, though the edges might feature simple embroidery or sewn hems to prevent fraying. Men's undertunics were generally knee-length, allowing freedom of movement for walking, working, or traveling. Sleeves were long but roomy, tapering slightly at the wrists to prevent interference with tools or weapons. The neckline was usually round or slightly V-shaped, fastened by a simple tie or left open. Linen undertunics were worn beneath wool tunics, providing an insulating layer that could be added to or removed depending on the weather. Women's undertunics were often longer, reaching mid-calf or even the ankles, and sometimes included subtle gathers at the waist for comfort. Sleeves could be narrow or wide, depending on personal preference and local style. A linen undertunic kept the body dry beneath heavier wool dresses or aprons. It was also functional for breastfeeding, domestic chores, and long periods of standing or kneeling. The Vikings understood the importance of layering. Undertunics were complemented by woolen outer garments, cloaks, and in colder regions, fur linings. Linen allowed for this layering without causing discomfort, preventing the itchy wool from touching the skin directly. The combination of linen and wool created a natural temperature-regulating system. Linen absorbed moisture, while wool trapped warmth. Fastening was a practical concern. Undertunics might feature small ties at the neck, sometimes hidden buttons or overlapping flaps for ease of dressing. These modest details were practical rather than decorative, designed to withstand daily wear and washing. The Vikings were meticulous about maintenance. Even a small tear in linen was mended quickly, ensuring the garment lasted for years. Children also wore linen undergarments, though often simpler in design. A child's tunic might be shorter and looser, allowing room for growth and play. Even for young Vikings, practical clothing was essential, as children were involved early in domestic and agricultural tasks. Linen could be dyed, though subtle shades were more common for undertunics than for outer garments. Pale creams, soft yellows, and light browns indicated that the cloth had been treated or bleached, while more vibrant colors were reserved for outerwear where social display mattered. The process of dyeing linen required knowledge of plants, minerals, and timing. Woad could create soft blue tones, madder root yielded muted reds, and well-produced delicate yellow. Each color had significance, though undergarments were often left natural for practicality. Wool tunics were typically worn over the linen layer, but the quality of the undertunic could also indicate status. In wealthier households, undertunics were finely woven, soft, and long-lasting. In simpler homes, the linen might be coarse or unevenly spun, sufficient for comfort but lacking refinement. In all cases, the undertunic was essential. It provided warmth, modesty, and protection, forming the invisible foundation for all outer layers. The cut of Viking tunics was functional, often rectangular pieces sewn together with minimal shaping, allowing for easy movement and efficient construction. While the undertunic hugged the body lightly, it was never restrictive. Vikings understood the importance of garments that accommodated labor, whether in the longhouse, the fields, or aboard a ship. The garments were designed to endure sweat, friction, and repeated washing, and when worn under layers of wool or leather, they could last for years. Undertunics also served as a base for personal expression. Simple embroidery along the cuffs, necklines, or hems could indicate regional style, family identity, or social rank. Some tunics featured narrow stripes woven into the fabric, a subtle pattern that spoke to the skill of the spinner and the wearer's taste. Even in these understated ways, clothing communicated more than warmth. It conveyed belonging and identity. The linen undertunic, though humble, was versatile. It could be worn during domestic chores, layered for travel, or combined with finer garments for ceremonial occasions. Its importance cannot be overstated. This garment was the Vikings' first defense against the elements, their comfort during labor, and a canvas for subtle display of wealth or taste. Maintenance of undertunics was a careful, ongoing task. Linen could be washed, bleached in sunlight, and repaired with delicate stitches. Wool tunics required less frequent washing but careful airing to avoid moths and decay. Every household had routines for caring for garments, reflecting the Viking understanding that durable clothing was essential to survival and social life. As you imagine a Viking rising in the morning, drawing the linen tunic over the head, adjusting the ties, and smoothing the fabric against the skin, it is clear that clothing was both practical and personal. The undertunic connected the individual to their body, their environment, and their community. It allowed freedom of movement, comfort during work, and a quiet statement of craftsmanship and status. Next, we will explore overgarments and cloaks, where function meets style. These layers demonstrate how Vikings balanced utility, social signaling, and protection against the harsh climate. From woolen cloaks fastened with decorative brooches to practical leather aprons for labor, outerwear completed the ensemble and expressed the wearer's identity as clearly as the undertunic provided comfort and practicality. The moment you step outside the warm longhouse, you feel the cold bite. It is here that Viking overgarments and cloaks come into their own, not mere decoration, but essential protection against wind, rain, and snow. While undertunics kept the skin comfortable, outer layers provided warmth, shielded the body, and communicated status. Cloaks were perhaps the most recognizable Viking overgarment. They were typically made of wool, woven thick, and sometimes felted to increase wind resistance. Cloaks came in different shapes and sizes. Rectangular or semicircular pieces of fabric that draped over the shoulders and fastened at the chest with brooches or pins. The shape allowed for freedom of movement, while the drape could be adjusted for warmth or convenience. A long cloak could cover the entire back, reaching almost to the ankles, or be shorter for everyday work. The fastening of cloaks was both practical and decorative. Brooches, often made of bronze, silver, or even gold, were used to pin the cloak in place. They could be simple discs for common folk or elaborately decorated pieces indicating wealth, craftsmanship, and social standing. The oval or trefoil designs were common, sometimes featuring animal motifs, interlacing patterns, or inlaid materials. Fasteners were positioned to allow the cloak to stay secure even during movement or harsh weather. Men's cloaks often prioritized utility, thick wool for warmth, darker colors to hide stains, and simple fasteners They could be thrown over one shoulder for riding or sailing, or wrapped fully around the body during storms. Women's cloaks, while also functional, might include brighter colors, finer weaving, or embroidered edges to indicate wealth and taste. Layered over long dresses or aprons, these cloaks completed a woman's attire for travel, ceremonial events, or social gatherings. In addition to wool, some cloaks were lined with fur, especially in colder regions like Iceland or northern Norway. Fur linings added insulation and were considered luxurious, signaling status, as well as providing warmth. These cloaks were worn by wealthier Vikings, including traders, chieftains, and women of higher rank. Fur might also be used to trim the edges or form collars, softening the garment and increasing its insulating properties. Overgarments extended beyond cloaks. Aprons, tabards, and leather surcoats were common among women for labor, and men might wear leather or padded wool over tunics when traveling or working outdoors. These garments were sturdy, able to withstand friction, mud, and repeated movement. For sailors and travelers, these layers were essential. Wool and leather repelled water, while additional pieces could be added for warmth or removed during exertion. The Vikings were also keenly aware of seasonal adaptation. In the summer months, outer garments were lighter, sometimes woven with coarser threads for airflow. In winter, cloaks were heavier, tightly woven and layered. Some had hoods sewn or pinned into place, protecting the head and neck. Hoods could be separate or integrated into the cloak itself, allowing flexibility. Capes and shawls might be wrapped around the shoulders, providing extra insulation while leaving the arms free for work. Colors and decoration played a role in social signaling. While practical work cloaks were often undyed or in muted tones of brown, gray, or natural wool, ceremonial or wealthier individuals wore brightly dyed fabrics. Deep blues, reds, and greens signaled wealth and access to more complex dyes, which were labor-intensive to produce. Embroidered edges, woven patterns, and decorative stitching further distinguished status. Even within a single household, the overgarments worn by the master of the home, their spouse, and children could differ markedly in quality, color, and embellishment. Functionality extended to mobility and ergonomics. Cloaks draped in a way that allowed carrying tools, hauling wood, or handling animals without catching. Longer cloaks were sometimes split at the back for easier walking or riding. Armholes or simple slits allowed movement while still maintaining warmth. The Vikings understood the balance between protection and usability. A garment that impeded motion would be discarded in favor of something simpler. Fasteners were not only practical but symbolic. Brooches, pins, and belts indicated rank, wealth, and family connections. For example, a pair of matching brooches holding a woman's apron dress at the shoulders was both decorative and functional. Brooches could be simple, mass-produced in local workshops, or exquisitely crafted in silver or bronze, sometimes inlaid with yellow, amber, or glass beads. Belts often complemented cloaks and overgarments. A leather belt could hold tools, knives, keys, or small pouches. The belt was essential for both men and women, linking clothing to function and status. The combination of cloak, brooch, and belt formed the outward expression of the wearer's social and economic position while maintaining practicality for daily life. Outerwear was also adapted for travel and activity. Long-distance travelers or raiders layered their garments to withstand exposure. Wool cloaks could be wrapped tightly against wind or rain. Hoods and scarves added protection. Boots and leggings completed the ensemble, keeping extremities warm and dry. These combinations were critical for survival during voyages across icy seas, long marches, or exposure to northern storms. Even ceremonial attire relied on overgarments. In feasts, rituals, or gatherings with visiting dignitaries, cloaks might be richly colored and trimmed, sometimes with fur collars and decorative pins. These garments were both status symbols and protective wear, showcasing wealth, craftsmanship, and regional style. In essence, Viking overgarments and cloaks were multifunctional, adaptable, and expressive. They shielded against climate, accommodated movement, displayed wealth and rank, and incorporated practical innovations. Every fold, drape, and fastener told a story about the wearer's social position, wealth, occupation, and environment. As we move forward, the next chapter will examine leadwear and footwear, exploring how Vikings protected their legs and feet from the harsh terrains, snow and mud, combining functionality with style, durability, and social signaling. These items, often overlooked, were as essential to Viking survival as cloaks and tunics, reflecting the careful balance between practicality and identity. The first thing to understand about Viking leadwear is that it was entirely practical. Snow, mud, rough terrain, and long days on foot required clothing that protected the legs while allowing freedom of movement. The Vikings understood that nothing could impede mobility if survival depended on it, and their garments reflected a careful balance between durability and comfort. Men typically wore trousers or leggings beneath their tunics. Trousers, often called briquet in historical sources, were made of wool or linen and could be full length or extend only to the knee, depending on climate and activity. Wool trousers were more common in the colder regions, providing insulation and protection. They were sewn from rectangular or tapered panels, often tied at the waist with a belt or drawstring, and sometimes at the ankles to prevent wind or snow from entering. The cut was simple yet efficient, prioritizing function over style, though finer stitching or subtle decorative embroidery could indicate wealth or regional identity. Women's leadwear was less elaborate, often consisting of linen undergarments or long dresses that extended to the ankles. In northern regions or during winter, they might wear woolen stockings or leggings beneath dresses for warmth. The principle was the same: comfort and protection without hindering mobility. Children typically wore scaled-down versions of adult trousers or leggings, allowing them to play, learn, and contribute to daily labor. Over their legwear, Vikings often added puttees or leg bindings, strips of wool or cloth wrapped around the lower leg. These bindings kept trousers tight, prevented drafts, and protected against brush, mud, or snow. They could be plain for laborers or decorated with simple patterns for wealthier individuals. The wrapping style varied regionally, but the purpose was consistent: functional warmth and a secure fit. Footwear was equally critical. Most Vikings wore soft leather shoes, often made from a single piece of tanned hide stitched together at the top or sides. Leather provided flexibility, durability, and water resistance, especially when treated with animal fats or oils. Simple shoes were typical for peasants, while richer materials and extra decoration were used by the affluent. Some shoes featured turned-up toes, which may have helped with walking on uneven ground, and thin leather soles allowed for better traction while remaining lightweight. For colder months, boots were essential. Wool or fur-lined boots extended above the ankle or even to mid-calf, offering insulation against snow and ice. The Vikings sometimes layered socks or stockings beneath their footwear, usually made from wool and were spun or woven in simple patterns. These layers trapped warmth and prevented frostbite during long winters or sea voyages. Footwear was not purely functional. Well-made boots also signaled status, especially if dyed, embroidered, or made of high-quality leather. Leadwear and footwear were often paired with belts or straps. Belts around the waist could hold tools, knives, or pouches, while straps at the ankles secured trousers or bindings. This combination of layering and fastening created an adaptable system, clothing that could be tightened or loosened as the activity or weather demanded. Regional variations were notable. In colder northern areas, while trousers might be doubled or lined with additional wool for warmth, and boots could be heavily fur-lined. In more temperate regions, lighter linen trousers or short boots sufficed. Even the poor adapted clothing to local conditions, reflecting the Viking principle of efficiency and practicality. A successful garment was one that lasted. moved with the wearer, and offered protection without fuss. Maintenance of legwear and footwear was essential. Shoes and boots were regularly oiled to prevent cracking, and wool trousers were washed, mended, or patched as needed. Leg bindings could be reused season after season, a testament to Viking thrift and craftsmanship. Even in labor-intensive households, care for clothing ensured longevity, conserving precious resources. Legwear and footwear were also symbolic, subtly communicating social identity. A nobleman might wear dyed wool trousers with fine stitching, paired with soft leather boots decorated with intricate patterns. A farmer or laborer might wear rough wool trousers, secured with simple ties, and sturdy leather shoes with minimal adornment. Children's clothing mirrored adult styles, preparing them to fit within their community and social expectations from an early age. Finally, legwear was not just about survival, it was about freedom of movement. Vikings were sailors, warriors, traders, and farmers. Trousers and leggings allowed them to row, climb, run, and fight without hindrance. Shoes allowed hours of walking across uneven terrain, while leg bindings kept garments secured during labor or battle. This combination of practicality, durability, and subtle expression defined the Viking approach to clothing. Garments were tools, shields, and statements all at once. With trousers, leggings, and sturdy shoes in place, the Viking was prepared for the daily rhythms of life, tending livestock, sailing, trading, or raiding. Each piece was carefully considered, how it moved with the body, how it endured the elements, and how it communicated the wearer's identity. In this way, legwear and footwear were as much a part of the Vikings' survival strategy as weapons or tools, an often overlooked foundation of their resilient lifestyle. Next, we will explore fastenings and accessories, where belts, brooches, pins, and pouches complete the ensemble. These items demonstrate how Vikings combined practicality with personal expression, turning functional tools into markers of identity, social status, and regional affiliation. Step closer and consider the small but vital elements that held a Viking outfit together: fastenings and accessories. While cloaks, tunics, trousers, and boots formed the main layers of clothing, these smaller items were essential for function, movement, and expression. Pins, brooches, belts, and pouches were not merely decorative. They were tools, symbols, and sometimes even social indicators. Begin with brooches, which were central to both function and identity. For Viking women, the twin brooches, or oval brooches, were often used to fasten the straps of their apron dresses at the shoulders. These brooches were crafted from bronze, silver, or sometimes gold, and were occasionally inlaid with decorative elements such as amber, glass, or yellow. The designs ranged from simple discs to intricate animal motifs or interlacing patterns. The craftsmanship signaled wealth, regional style, and sometimes even personal taste. Brooches were not purely aesthetic. They ensured garments stayed in place, allowing freedom of movement while holding heavy layers securely on the shoulders. Men also relied on brooches and pins, though differently. Small metal pins fastened cloaks or tunics at the neck or chest, keeping outer layers from slipping during travel, labor, or battle. While often plain and practical, some pins were engraved or decorated, indicating the wearer's wealth or connections. In this way, even small fasteners could serve as a silent declaration of status. Belts were another critical accessory, especially for men but also for women. Leather belts encircled the waist, holding tools, knives, keys, or pouches. They were functional but also symbolic. A finely tooled or dyed belt could indicate social rank. Belts could also provide support for heavy tunics, helping to distribute weight evenly, especially when carrying tools, weapons, or pouches for coins and valuables. Speaking of pouches, these small leather or cloth containers were essential for daily life. Vikings did not carry pockets in the modern sense. Pouches attached to belts held coins, keys, knives, flint for fire, or small personal items. The shape and decoration of pouches could reflect occupation and social status, a simple leather pouch for a farmer, a stitched and dyed pouch for a trader, or a finely decorated pouch for a noblewoman. Fastenings were also practical in layering. Cloaks fastened with brooches or pins could be adjusted depending on weather. A heavy wool cloak could be draped over one shoulder in mild weather or wrapped tightly around the body during storms. Tunics might have ties at the neckline or buttons made of bone or horn. Leg bindings wrapped around the lower legs to secure trousers or keep warmth in, and the cords themselves could be dyed or braided. Jewelry was a dual-purpose accessory, practical and expressive. Rings, necklaces, and beads could hold fabric together or simply display wealth and identity. Amber beads were popular, often worn by women as necklaces or sewn onto clothing. Bronze and silver jewelry could indicate trade connections, as these materials were sometimes imported or worked by skilled craftsmen. Even decorative stitching or embroidery along hems could function as both reinforcement and ornamentation. Children's fastenings and accessories mirrored those of adults, though simplified. Small brooches might secure a child's apron or tunic, and tiny belts or pouches held miniature tools or personal treasures. In this way, clothing and its attachments were part of social education. Children learned early how to dress practically while displaying identity within the household and community. The Vikings were resourceful in making and maintaining these items. Brooches could be polished or repaired, leather belts oiled and stitched, pins sharpened or replaced. Nothing was disposable. Each accessory had to endure the laborious daily life of farming, sailing, trading, or raiding, while remaining functional and, for the wealthy, decorative. Fastenings and accessories also allowed flexibility in function. A cloak could be removed and folded, a tunic adjusted for temperature, a belt tightened to secure tools. Even something as small as a brooch or pin mattered. It held together layers that provided warmth, protection, and modesty, and allowed the wearer to move freely. The Vikings' careful attention to these details demonstrates their understanding that clothing was more than fabric. It was a system of practical tools, each component contributing to survival and social expression. In summary, fastenings and accessories were essential extensions of Viking clothing. Brooches, pins, belts, and pouches held garments together, facilitated work and travel, and communicated identity, rank, and taste. Even the simplest pin or cord served multiple purposes. It was functional, symbolic, and, when crafted with skill, a reflection of art and culture. Next, we will explore headgear and hairstyles, examining how Vikings protected and styled their heads, from practical caps and hoods to personal grooming habits that carried meaning in society. Head coverings were both practical and expressive, completing the functional and social ensemble of Viking dress. Step back into the Viking world and consider the top of the body, often overlooked yet crucial. The head. For the Vikings, headgear and hairstyles were deeply practical, symbolic, and expressive. They were not just about warmth or protection. They also communicated identity, status, and regional or familial affiliation. Caps and hoods were the most common forms of headgear. Simple woolen caps kept the head warm during harsh winters, especially in the northernmost settlements where frostbite was a real threat. These caps were often sewn from rectangular panels of wool, sometimes lined with linen or fur for added insulation. The design was straightforward, shaped to cover the crown and ears, with enough room for hair to remain comfortably tucked beneath. Some caps had small flaps to cover the neck, protecting the wearer from wind and cold. Hoods, either attached to cloaks or worn separately, provided versatility. A hood could be pulled over the head in cold weather or left down to drape around the shoulders during mild days. Wealthier individuals might have hoods trimmed with fur, creating both a luxurious appearance and an additional layer of warmth. Women's hoods or veils, sometimes made from finely woven linen, could be pinned with decorative brooches, combining practical coverage with elegance. Headgear served more than practical purposes. In ceremonial or social contexts, caps, hoods, or veils could signal wealth and status. A richly dyed hood, lined with fur or stitched with embroidery, indicated that the wearer was not just practical but also prosperous. For men, a finely crafted wool cap with a polished pin might announce standing or trade connections. In some cases, imported silk or finely woven fabrics were used for head coverings among the elite, bringing color, texture, and distinction to the Viking ensemble. Now consider hairstyles, which were equally important as headgear in the Viking aesthetic. Men typically wore their hair long, though styles varied by region and personal preference. Braiding, tying back, or trimming around the face were common methods for keeping hair manageable while working, sailing, or fighting. Cleanliness and grooming were significant. Viking sagas often reference well-groomed hair as a sign of social propriety and personal pride. A warrior with neatly tied hair or a carefully braided beard might be seen as disciplined and capable, while the messy or unkempt could suggest low status or neglect. Beards were a particular focus for men. A full beard was common, often maintained with oil or combing. Some wore braids or twisted strands, sometimes adorned with small beads or clasps. The beard served as both protection from the elements and a statement of masculinity. In battle or ceremonial contexts, a well-kept beard or hair could distinguish a respected man, indicating maturity, strength, or social influence. Women's hair was equally expressive. Married women often wore their hair covered with veils, caps, or hoods, while unmarried women might wear their hair loose, braided, or coiled. Braids were common, sometimes adorned with ribbons, pins, or beads. Long hair was a sign of beauty and vitality, and women invested time in grooming and arranging it daily. In some regions, hair color and style carried social or cultural significance, distinguishing local traditions and identity. Children followed the same patterns. Boys' hair was often cut or tied simply, while girls' hair might be braided and occasionally adorned with small beads or pins. Even at a young age, headgear and hairstyles reflected practical needs, warmth, protection, and neatness, while subtly communicating family status and regional identity. The interplay of hair and headgear was important. Caps could accommodate long hair, braids could be tucked neatly beneath hoods, and pins served both functional and decorative purposes. This combination allowed Vikings to move freely, work hard, and maintain social expectations without sacrificing comfort or style. Headgear also served ritual and ceremonial purposes. During feasts, festivals, or religious gatherings, caps, hoods, or veils might be elaborately decorated, dyed, or trimmed with metal or fur. Hairstyles could be braided intricately for special occasions, indicating celebration, status, or affiliation with a particular family or group. Even in practical, everyday life, these small choices mattered. A carefully maintained hair braid or a functional wool cap was part of the ongoing performance of Viking identity. Function and fashion were inseparable. Cap, hood, veil, braid, and beard were all elements of a coordinated ensemble. They protected against harsh weather, facilitated work and travel, and communicated who the wearer was, their wealth, their occupation, their region, and their personal style. Just as with tunics, cloaks, trousers, and footwear, the Vikings approached headgear and hairstyles with a balance of practicality and expression. Finally, the care of hair and headgear reflected broader Viking values. Combs made of bone, pins carved from metal or wood, and dyes for clothing or hair were all tools of maintenance and self-expression. Vikings valued cleanliness, presentation, and resourcefulness, seeing the head not just as a functional body part, but as a canvas for identity and cultural expression. In the next chapter, we will explore jewelry and decoration, delving deeper into how Vikings combined beauty and utility, signaling wealth, status, and personal taste through rings, necklaces, beads, and sewn adornments. Jewelry was not merely decorative. It was an integral part of the clothing system, enhancing both social meaning and visual impact in everyday life and ceremonial contexts. As you step into the Viking world, notice the subtle gleam along a cloak, the glint of metal at the shoulder, or the delicate sparkle of beads catching the firelight. Vikings were not only practical in their clothing but also attentive to ornamentation, using jewelry and decoration to express identity, status, and cultural values. Far from being mere luxury, these items were deeply integrated into daily life and social communication. Necklaces were one of the most visible and versatile forms of jewelry. Women often wore strings of beads made from amber, glass, or even imported materials, such as semi-precious stones. Amber, a fossilized resin found in the Baltic region, was especially prized, valued not only for its beauty but also for its perceived protective properties. Beads could be strung in simple lines for everyday wear or layered in intricate patterns for ceremonial occasions. Necklaces communicated wealth and status. A string of carefully polished amber beads signaled both prosperity and a connection to trade networks that spanned the Baltic and beyond. Rings served multiple purposes. Men and women alike wore rings of silver, bronze, or gold, sometimes inscribed with runes or decorated with geometric or animal motifs. Rings could signify marital status, social rank, or allegiance to a particular clan or household. Wealthy individuals might have multiple rings, each with distinct design elements and personal significance. Even a modest household might own a simple bronze or iron ring, practical for securing garments or symbolic in daily rituals. Brooches, pins, and clasps, functional decorations, were both practical and symbolic. Brooches secured cloaks and apron dresses, while pins held tunics or hoods in place. The quality of the metal, the intricacy of the design, and any inlaid stones or amber were immediate indicators of wealth and status. Animal motifs, serpents, birds, or wolves were common, reflecting both artistic style and cultural symbolism. Some designs were purely ornamental, while others carried protective or symbolic meaning derived from mythology, folklore, or clan associations. Belts and belt fittings were also decorated. Leather belts might be embossed or stamped with patterns, while metal buckles could feature engraved designs or inlaid materials. Pouches hung from belts, sometimes adorned with small decorations that indicated trade skill, craftsmanship, or personal taste. These details were not frivolous. In a society that valued practical knowledge, the artistry of such items demonstrated both skill and resources. Women's apron dresses often featured sewn decoration. Simple running stitches, decorative hems, or patterned embroidery added color and texture. These embellishments were modest compared to the gleaming jewelry, but they served to reinforce personal and family identity. In some regions, sewn patterns could indicate local origin, marital status, or household wealth. Even the smallest stitches reflected the care and effort invested in daily life. Children were included in this ornamental system from a young age. Small beads, pins, or simple brooches could adorn a child's tunic or hair, introducing them to the visual language of social identity. Even when practical clothing was the priority, subtle decoration taught children the cultural codes embedded in everyday dress. Hair adornments complemented jewelry and decoration. Beads could be threaded into braids, pins could fasten veils or hoods, and small metal rings could accentuate braids or curls. These adornments were both functional, securing the hair, and expressive, signaling personal taste, family wealth, or ceremonial preparation. Color played a crucial role in decoration. Natural dyes allowed bright patterns or subtle contrasts on fabric, while metals and stones added glint and texture. Combining fabric color, bead arrangement, and metal ornamentation created ensembles that were visually striking while remaining practical. Even in harsh climates, these decorative choices allowed individuals to assert identity and beauty within daily life. The Vikings also borrowed influences from trade. Silk threads, semi-precious stones, and exotic materials might appear in wealthier households, showing connections to distant lands, such as Byzantium, the Middle East, or the British Isles. Imported beads or metalwork were highly valued and often integrated into clothing in ways that emphasized both prestige and artistic skill. Jewelry and decoration were also tied to ritual and ceremonial life. Special occasions, weddings, feasts, religious gatherings, often called for additional adornments. Women might wear multiple strings of beads, elaborate brooches, or embroidered dresses. Men could wear engraved rings or decorated cloak pins. These items signified readiness for ceremony, respect for tradition, and social awareness. Even everyday adornments were carefully maintained. Jewelry was polished, beads strung securely, and small repairs were common. In a society where resources were precious, maintaining adornments was as important as maintaining clothing or tools. This attention to care reinforced the Viking value of durability, skill, and foresight. In summary, Viking jewelry and decoration were far more than ornamental flourishes. They served multiple purposes: functional, protective, social, and expressive. Necklaces, rings, pins, brooches, belts, beads, and sewn embellishments worked together to convey identity, wealth, and cultural affiliation. They reflected artistry, trade networks, and craftsmanship. Through these adornments, Vikings communicated visually to their world, signaling who they were, where they came from, and their place within society. In the next chapter, we will turn to children and clothing, examining how the youngest Vikings were dressed, how they adapted adult styles for practical use, and how clothing served to socialize children into Viking culture, status, and identity. From tiny tunics to miniature jewelry, children's attire mirrored the practicality and expression found in adult clothing. Step into a Viking household and imagine the small figures moving among adults, children learning, playing, and participating in daily life. Clothing for children was just as practical as for adults, yet adapted for growth, mobility, and socialization. From the moment a child was born, garments were chosen not only for warmth and protection, but also to introduce them to the visual language of Viking society. For infants, the first garments were simple linen swaddles or wraps. Linen, soft and breathable, protected delicate skin and absorbed moisture. In colder regions, these swaddles might be lined with wool or tucked into small woolen cloaks. Swaddling also kept infants secure, providing comfort and stability while the mother worked nearby. Though minimal, even these garments sometimes included embroidered edges or small decorative touches, reflecting familial care and the subtle display of status. As toddlers grew into walking children, they transitioned to miniature tunics. These were scaled-down versions of adult garments, often knee-length for boys and ankle-length for girls. Linen remained the primary fabric for undertunics, with wool added for outer layers when necessary. Simple ties or small fasteners allowed children to dress and undress with some independence, while still accommodating growth. Durability was key. Children were active, running, climbing, and exploring, so their clothing had to endure wear and tear without hindering movement. Legwear for children mirrored adult trousers or leggings, but often featured simpler construction. Wool leggings kept legs warm, while leg bindings or ties secured trousers over the calves and ankles. Shoes were generally soft leather, easy to put on and flexible for long hours of play. In colder climates, boots might be fur-lined, providing insulation, while small soles adapted to uneven terrain. Functionality dominated over ornamentation, though small touches, dyed stitching or tiny metal clasps, could indicate family wealth or regional style. Girls often wore miniature apron dresses, secured with tiny brooches at the shoulders, echoing adult styles. These dresses were layered over undertunics and paired with wool cloaks in colder months. Hair for young girls might be braided or tied back, sometimes adorned with beads, small pins, or ribbons. introducing them to the cultural importance of hair as a form of personal and social expression. Boys' hair was often kept practical, tied or cropped to prevent interference with play or chores, yet grooming remained part of their daily routine. Children's accessories reflected both utility and social training. Small belts or pouches held toys, personal items, or miniature tools. Jewelry, if present, was scaled to size. Tiny rings, beads, or pins allowed children to learn the visual codes of wealth, status, and identity without risking valuable adult jewelry. In this way, clothing and adornment functioned as early education in social norms, teaching children how to move, behave, and present themselves in a community-conscious manner. Seasonal adaptation was critical. Young Vikings needed warmth in winter, so under-tunics, wool layers, cloaks, and hats were essential. Summer clothing emphasized breathability. Lighter linen tunics, simple dresses, and thin stockings allowed movement while preventing overheating. Layers were flexible. Outer garments could be removed for play or work. The layering system mirrored adult clothing, teaching children how to regulate warmth, comfort, and mobility. Maintenance and repair were also part of the learning process. Children participated in mending clothes, reinforcing Viking values of resourcefulness and care. Loose threads were stitched, small tears patched, and garments adjusted to fit as children grew. These routines taught responsibility and practical skills while ensuring longevity of each garment. Hand-me-downs were common, with clothing passed between siblings, extended family, or even neighbors, reinforcing social bonds and efficiency. Even ceremonial attire included children. During feasts, religious rituals, or visits from dignitaries, young Vikings might wear finely dyed tunics, decorative aprons, or small brooches. Beads, embroidery, and miniature accessories introduced children to the same codes of status, wealth, and community identity that adults navigated. Participation in ceremonial dress helped socialize children, teaching them their role within family and society. Children's clothing, therefore, was a blend of practicality, education, and cultural training. Each tunic, apron, or cloak served multiple purposes: protection from the elements, freedom of movement, and preparation for social life. Even small details, such as embroidered beads or decorative fasteners, conveyed meaning, teaching the child about identity, heritage, and hierarchy. By the time a Viking child reached adolescence, their clothing closely mirrored adult styles. Boys adopted trousers, tunics, and cloaks suited to their daily labor and future roles as warriors or farmers. Girls wore full-length dresses, aprons, and layered cloaks, learning both domestic responsibilities and social display. Through clothing, Vikings passed knowledge, values, and tradition from one generation to the next, ensuring continuity of style, function, and identity. In the next chapter, we will examine work clothes versus ceremonial clothes, exploring how Vikings distinguished daily utility from formal display. From farming and crafting to feasting and ritual, clothing signaled purpose, status, and respect, blending function and culture seamlessly. Step into the Viking world and consider the daily duality of their clothing: garments designed for labor and those reserved for ceremonial or social occasions. The distinction was subtle yet essential, reflecting the Vikings' need for practical clothing alongside their desire for display, status signaling, and cultural expression. Every garment served a purpose, whether in the longhouse, the field, or at a feast. Work clothes function above all. The backbone of daily Viking clothing was practicality. Farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, and laborers required garments that could endure sweat, dirt, and movement. Wool, linen, and leather were the core materials, chosen for durability and warmth. Tunics and trousers were cut simply, favoring rectangular panels sewn together to allow freedom of movement and facilitate mending. Layers were essential. Linen under tunics absorbed moisture, while outer garments retained heat, and leather aprons or protective cloaks shielded from tools, dirt, or animal interactions. Women's work attire often included apron dresses layered over linen under tunics. Woolen shawls or cloaks could be draped over the shoulders, and belts secured small pouches or tools. Footwear was sturdy but practical, typically soft leather shoes or short boots. Hair was tied back or braided to prevent interference during domestic tasks, farming, or crafting. Even children's work clothing mirrored adults' practicality, allowing full participation in household and farm labor. Men's work attire emphasized mobility. Tunics were loose enough to accommodate physical labor. Trousers allowed freedom for walking, bending, and lifting, and leg bindings secured trousers for efficiency. Wool cloaks could be adjusted depending on weather, draped lightly in warmer months, wrapped tightly in winter. Boots were functional and durable, and belts carried tools, knives, or pouches essential for daily work. Simple brooches or pins held garments together, prioritizing sturdiness over decoration. Colors for work clothes were typically muted and practical. Undyed wool or linen, shades of brown, gray, and off-white dominated, as bright colors would fade or show dirt quickly. Subtle patterns in weaving or stitching might appear, but heavy embellishment was uncommon for laborers. Durability and functionality dictated choices. Garments had to endure repeated washing, mending, and heavy activity. Ceremonial clothes, display and identity. In contrast, ceremonial clothing emphasized display, identity, and status. These garments were worn for feasts, weddings, religious gatherings, visits from dignitaries, or ritual occasions. While still constructed from practical materials like wool and linen, the choice of color, decoration, and accessories was intentional, communicating wealth, skill, and cultural affiliation. Women's ceremonial dress often featured finely woven fabrics, bright dyes, and decorative embroidery. Brooches at the shoulders secured apron dresses, while necklaces of amber, glass beads, or imported stones showcased wealth and trade connections. Cloaks might be lined with fur trimmed with embroidery or fastened with ornate pins. Hair was carefully styled, braided, and adorned with beads, emphasizing beauty, social status, and adherence to cultural norms. Even small details like a decorative belt or patterned stocking were part of the visual statement. Men's ceremonial attire followed similar principles. Tunics might be longer, woven from finer wool, or dyed in richer colors. Cloaks could be fastened with decorated brooches, sometimes incorporating silver or bronze. Rings and jewelry were worn visibly, signaling wealth, alliances, or family connections. Belts carried pouches and tools, but the adornments themselves could also indicate status. Even practical items like boots were carefully maintained, polished, or lined with fur for ceremonial appearance. Children also participated in ceremonial display. Young boys might wear tunics with decorative stitching, small cloaks, or miniature brooches. Girls could have brightly colored dresses, aprons, and beadwork in their hair. These garments allowed children to engage in social and ritual life while learning the visual language of Viking society. Practicality meets prestige. Even ceremonial clothing was still functional. Vikings were practical people. Garments had to move with the body, endure some degree of activity, and remain comfortable during long feasts, rituals, or journeys. But in ceremonial contexts, decoration and status were emphasized. Bright colors, elaborate embroidery, jewelry, and imported materials distinguished the wealthy and socially prominent from ordinary villagers. These choices were not purely aesthetic. They were a form of communication, a way of signaling identity and respect in a socially cohesive society. The distinction between work clothes and ceremonial clothes was contextual and flexible. The same basic garments could be adapted with layers, adornments, or fasteners. A wool tunic worn for labor could, with added embroidery, brooches, or a fur-lined cloak, become appropriate for a feast. This adaptability reflected Viking resourcefulness. Practical garments could serve multiple purposes. but ceremonial wear emphasized refinement, skill, and social awareness. Seasonal considerations. Season played a crucial role in determining work versus ceremonial clothing. Summer feasts might see lighter fabrics and brighter colors, while winter gatherings demanded heavy wool layers, fur trims, and practical boots. Work clothing also adapted to seasonal labor. Lighter tunics in warmer months, layered wool and leather in colder weather. Regardless of season, ceremonial clothing incorporated extra decoration or finery, creating distinction even under practical constraints. Conclusion: clothing as communication. Work clothes and ceremonial clothes together illustrate a central principle of Viking dress. Every garment communicated purpose, status, and identity. Practicality dominated for daily labor, ensuring mobility, warmth, and durability. Ceremony and display layered on social meaning, allowing individuals to signal wealth, rank, and cultural connection. Through clothing, Vikings navigated both the physical demands of life and the social expectations of their communities. In the next chapter, we will explore textiles and production techniques, examining how Vikings produced wool, linen, and leather garments. We will delve into spinning, weaving, dyeing, and tailoring practices that made these garments durable, functional, and expressive, revealing the craftsmanship and labor behind every item of clothing. Step behind the scenes of Viking life, into the workshops, fields, and longhouse corners where garments began their journey. Clothing did not appear fully formed. Every tunic, cloak, and pair of trousers was the result of labor, skill, and deep knowledge of materials. Understanding how Vikings produced their textiles illuminates the blend of practicality, artistry, and resourcefulness that defined their clothing. Fibers and materials. The Vikings relied on three primary fibers: wool, linen, and leather. Wool came from domesticated sheep, abundant across Scandinavia and Iceland. Sheep were sheared annually, and the wool was sorted by quality. Soft, fine wool for tunics or cloaks worn close to the body, coarser wool for outer layers or labor garments. Wool was ideal for warmth and insulation, crucial in the cold northern climates. Its natural crimp trapped air, making garments lightweight yet warm, and it could be felted or woven to improve durability and weather resistance. Linen, spun from flax, was essential for undergarments. Flax was cultivated in fields, harvested, and then retted, soaked to loosen fibers, before being dried, combed, and spun into threads. Linen was breathable and smooth against the skin, making it ideal for tunics, shirts, and underlayers. It could be worn year-round, absorbing moisture and keeping the wearer comfortable. Linen also accepted dyes well, providing pale colors for everyday wear or brighter tones for ceremonial garments. Leather was harvested from cattle, goats, and sometimes deer, serving as shoes, belts, pouches, and protective outer layers. Hides were tanned using natural processes involving bark, plant tannins, and smoke, creating durable and flexible material. Leather could be cut, stitched, and dyed, forming footwear or protective aprons suited to both labor and travel. Vikings understood how to balance toughness with comfort, producing leather that could endure years of daily use. Spinning and weaving. Once fibers were harvested, they were spun into thread using simple spindles or spinning wheels. Vikings were skilled spinners, producing even, strong yarns suitable for weaving or knitting. The thickness of the thread varied according to garment type. Finer threads for under tunics, coarser for outer layers. Spinning was often a domestic task, done by women while supervising children or performing other household duties. Weaving was the next step. Using warp-weighted looms, Vikings wove threads into fabric for tunics, cloaks, and dresses. These looms allowed for even tension and consistent weaving, producing wool and linen cloth suitable for both labor and ceremonial use. Patterns could be simple, with plain weaves for everyday garments, or complex, with stripes, checks, or subtle geometric designs for status display. Weaving was a craft. The choice of fiber, thread thickness and pattern reflected both function and aesthetic judgment. Some fabrics were felted, a process in which wool fibers were compacted and matted together using heat, moisture, and pressure. Felted wool became thick, wind-resistant, and water-repellent, ideal for cloaks or outer layers in cold, damp regions. This technique demonstrates Viking ingenuity, combining natural fiber properties with mechanical processes to enhance performance. Dyeing and color. Color was produced using natural dyes from plants, roots, bark, and minerals. Woad provided blue hues, madder root yielded reds, weld offered yellow, and lichens or mosses could produce greens or bronze. Dyes were labor-intensive, requiring repeated soaking, heating, and mordant to fix the color. Wealthier households could afford brighter or more varied colors, while common folk relied on natural, muted shades. Even in everyday clothing, subtle variations in hue reflected regional identity, available resources, and personal taste. The Vikings also used bleaching and finishing techniques. Linen could be bleached in sunlight for a pale cream appearance, while wool could be cleaned, carded, and combed for smoothness. Edges were finished with simple hems or decorative stitching to prevent fraying. Every garment was carefully prepared to maximize durability and comfort. Cutting and sewing. Once fabric was ready, it was cut into panels. Viking garments were often constructed from rectangles or trapezoids sewn together with simple seams. This approach minimized waste and allowed for easy mending. Patterns were basic but efficient, designed to accommodate movement, layering, and future adjustments. Sleeves, tunics, trousers, and cloaks were assembled using linen or wool thread, with stitching that was strong enough to endure daily labor. Fasteners were integrated at this stage. Small ties, pins, or button loops were added, ensuring garments could be adjusted, layered, or secured. For wealthier garments, decorative stitching or embroidery might be added along hems, cuff, and necklines. Even subtle adornment reflected careful craftsmanship, elevating the garment beyond pure function. Care and maintenance. Vikings understood that garments were long-term investments. Clothing was regularly washed, mended, and stored properly. Wool could be aired to remove odors and moisture. Linen could be bleached and washed in water or ashes. Tiers were patched promptly, stitches reinforced, and leather treated to prevent drying or cracking. In households, clothing maintenance was a shared responsibility, reinforcing skills and thrift across generations. Integration of form and function. Through spinning, weaving, dyeing, and sewing, Vikings produced garments that balanced practicality, durability, and identity. A single tunic represented hours of labor, skill, and material knowledge. Wool and linen combined to regulate warmth and comfort. Leather and fur added protection. Dyes, embroidery, and fasteners communicated status. Clothing was thus both a tool and a statement, bridging the material and social worlds. Conclusion. Textiles and production techniques reveal the ingenuity and resourcefulness of Viking society. Every step, from flax fields to shearing sheep, from spinning thread to weaving and dyeing, from cutting panels to sewing and finishing, was guided by both practical needs and cultural values. Garments were durable, adaptable, and expressive, reflecting identity, status, and daily life. The labor behind Viking clothing underscores its central role in survival, social interaction, and cultural continuity. In the next chapter, we will examine seasonal clothing and adaptation, exploring how Vikings adjusted their attire throughout the year, balancing warmth, protection, and style to endure harsh northern climates while signaling identity and status. Step into the Viking calendar, where clothing changes with the seasons, and every layer is carefully considered to meet the challenges of northern climates. Life in Scandinavia demanded adaptability. Harsh winters, unpredictable rain, icy winds, and brief but intense summers. Vikings mastered the art of seasonal clothing, balancing warmth, protection, mobility, and social display throughout the year. Winter clothing, insulation, and protection. Winter in the Viking world was long and cold, with snow covering fields for months. Clothing had to provide insulation while allowing mobility for farming, travel, or defending the homestead. Wool was the primary material, valued for its warmth, durability, and ability to retain heat even when damp. Multiple layers were standard. Under tunics and shirts, linen garments were worn close to the skin to absorb moisture and wick away sweat. Fine wool under tunics added extra insulation. Outer tunics and dresses. Wool tunics or dresses provided warmth and could be layered over undergarments. The fabric was dense and sometimes felted for additional wind resistance. Cloaks and capes. Heavy wool cloaks, often lined with fur, were draped over shoulders and fastened with brooches. Hoods protected the head and neck from biting wind. Legwear. Wool trousers or leggings, sometimes doubled for insulation, were secured with leg bindings. Fur-lined boots or leather shoes kept feet warm during snow and ice. Accessories, scarves, gloves or mittens, and hats or caps protected extremities. Wealthier Vikings could afford fur trims, while commoners used layered wool or repurposed garments. Winter garments were not just functional. They were a statement of preparation and status. A finely woven cloak with decorative brooches indicated wealth and care, while practical work clothes demonstrated resourcefulness and skill. Spring and summer clothing, breathability and lightness. As the snow melted and fields became fertile, Vikings adapted their clothing to warmer temperatures. Layering became lighter, fabrics were thinner, and colors could be brighter. Under tunics, linen became more prominent, allowing breathability and comfort during active labor. Outer garments, lighter wool tunics or dresses were worn, and heavy cloaks were reserved for evenings or inclement weather. Legwear, shorter trousers or lighter leggings allowed mobility and cooling. Footwear, leather shoes were practical, while fur-lined boots were unnecessary except for travel in damp or rough terrain. Headgear, caps and hoods were lighter, sometimes omitted during hot weather. Women's veils or hair coverings were breathable while maintaining social norms. Spring and summer clothing emphasized activity and efficiency. Farmers, fishermen, and traders needed garments that allowed rowing, planting, and walking long distances. Brightly dyed fabrics became more common, especially for ceremonial occasions, reflecting seasonal celebration and trade connections. Autumn clothing transition and layering. Autumn brought cooling temperatures, rain, and strong winds. Vikings prepared by layering strategically. Tunics and dresses. Wool layers were added over linen undergarments. Longer tunics provided coverage against wind. Cloaks and hoods. Medium-weight cloaks were draped for warmth and protection. Hoods became more essential for travel or outdoor work. Legwear and footwear. Wool leggings and sturdy boots protected from wet ground and early snow. Leg bindings helped keep garments secure. Accessories, scarves and mittens reappeared, along with belts for securing tools, knives, and pouches. Autumn clothing served as a bridge between summer and winter, balancing breathability with insulation. Vikings relied on layering to quickly adapt to sudden weather changes, demonstrating flexibility and planning. Regional variation. Seasonal clothing also reflected geography. Coastal communities experienced milder winters but strong winds, requiring windproof cloaks and waterproof footwear. Northern settlements faced harsher cold and snow, prompting heavier wool layers, fur linings, and fully enclosed boots. Southern regions of Scandinavia allowed lighter garments during mild winters. In each case, Vikings adapted materials, layering, and accessories to maximize protection and comfort. Seasonal ceremonial clothing. Seasonal changes affected ceremonial dress as well. Winter feasts and religious observances required heavy cloaks, furs, and layered tunics, while summer gatherings allowed brighter colors, lighter fabrics, and more visible jewelry. Seasonal adaptation influenced display and identity. Vikings balanced the need for social presentation with the practical requirements of temperature and weather. Practical strategies. Vikings used several strategies to cope with seasonal variation. Layering. Modular garments allowed easy addition or removal of layers for changing conditions. Adaptable fasteners. Brooches, pins, ties, and belts made it easy to adjust fit and warmth. Reusing garments, cloaks, tunics, and leg bindings were repurposed, patched, and layered seasonally. Insulation. Wool, fur, and leather were strategically combined to protect core body temperature and extremities. These strategies highlight Viking ingenuity. Clothing was dynamic, adjusted daily, and designed to meet survival needs while maintaining cultural expression. Conclusion. Seasonal clothing demonstrates the Vikings' practical intelligence and foresight. They understood the relationship between materials, climate, and activity. Each season dictated not just what was worn, but how it was layered, fastened, and accessorized. From winter insulation to summer likeness, from spring renewal to autumn transition, Viking clothing was a living system, flexible and adaptive, blending protection, mobility, and expression. In the next chapter, we will explore clothing for travel and seafaring, examining how Vikings dressed for long journeys, voyages across icy seas, and life aboard ships. Travel clothing required durability, warmth, and mobility, reflecting both practical needs and social signaling during journeys. Step onto a Viking ship and feel the chill of northern waters. Life at sea demanded clothing that protected against wind, spray, and cold, while allowing freedom to row, steer, and climb rigging. Viking travel, whether for trade, exploration, or raiding, required garments optimized for endurance, mobility, and layered warmth. Clothing designed for the unpredictability of the sea and long journeys. Materials and layers. Seafaring Vikings relied heavily on wool, linen, and leather, using each material strategically. Linen under tunics, lightweight and breathable. Linen absorbed sweat while remaining comfortable against the skin. Long voyages demanded clothing that managed moisture, preventing chafing and maintaining warmth. Wool outer layers. Tunics, trousers, and cloaks provided insulation. Wool retained heat even when wet, essential for sailors exposed to wind-driven rain or sea spray. Felted wool cloaks were particularly effective, shedding water and blocking wind. Leather, shoes, belts, and protective aprons were crafted from tanned hides, resistant to abrasion from ship decks and rigging. Leather gloves or mittens protected hands from rope burns during rowing or sail handling. Fur, wealthier travelers or leaders added fur linings to cloaks, hoods, and hats, providing additional warmth on long northern voyages. Even modest seafarers might line their caps with soft fur scraps for insulation. Layering was key to survival. A linen tunic allowed air circulation and moisture control, while wool layers trapped heat. Cloaks could be draped over shoulders or wrapped around the torso, fastened with brooches or pins for a snug fit. Wool leg bindings prevented trousers from catching wind or slipping during activity, and boots with soft soles enabled traction on wet, uneven decks. Practical adaptations. Seafaring clothing included adaptations to address specific challenges. Windproofing. Heavy wool and felted layers reduced wind penetration. Cloaks and hoods could be adjusted to cover the neck and shoulders tightly. Water resistance. Wool and felt repelled water naturally, while leather and fur added additional protection. Sailors often layered clothing to trap air and maintain warmth even when damp. Mobility. Clothing allowed full range of motion for rowing, climbing, and lifting. Loose but secure tunics, adjustable belts, and flexible leather footwear enabled action without hindrance. Ease of repair. Long journeys required self-sufficiency. Vikings carried needles, thread, and small scraps of cloth for mending garments mid-voyage. Headgear and hands. The head and hands were particularly vulnerable during travel. Caps and hoods. Fitted wool caps covered the crown and ears, while hoods from cloaks protected the neck and shoulders. Hoods could be pulled tight against wind and rain or left loose in calmer conditions. Gloves and mittens. Leather or wool gloves protected hands during rowing, sail handling, and cargo management. Mittens could be layered over gloves for extra warmth during colder voyages. Footwear. Decks were often wet, cold, and uneven. Vikings wore soft leather shoes for general travel, sometimes lined with wool or fur. Leather boots, secured with leg bindings, were preferred for long voyages or rough terrain. Footwear had to provide grip, warmth, and flexibility, ensuring sailors could move safely without slipping. Travel and social signaling. Even at sea, clothing conveyed status and identity. Wealthier travelers wore dyed wool, finer linen, and decorated cloaks. Brooches and rings remained visible, signaling rank or wealth even aboard ship. Trade clothing might be brighter or include imported fabrics, demonstrating connections and prestige at ports or marketplaces. Leaders and captains could afford furs, embroidered layers, and high-quality accessories, asserting authority during voyages and upon arrival. Despite the functional requirements of travel, Vikings retained their attention to aesthetics. A neatly fastened cloak, polished brooch, or carefully braided beard communicated discipline and identity even in the harshest maritime environments. Children and travel clothing. Children traveling with adults were dressed similarly to adults, scaled for size. Wool tunics and trousers layered over linen undergarments. Cloaks for warmth, adjusted for mobility. Small leather shoes or boots. Hats, caps, or hoods to protect from cold and wind. Children learned adaptability and practical care through these garments, understanding how to dress for protection and mobility from a young age. Ceremonial travel. Even during travel, ceremonial attire was sometimes integrated. Feasts, trading meetings, or religious visits required finer fabrics, brooches, and necklaces. Cloaks and tunics could be layered with decorative elements, balancing protection with social presentation. Jewelry and accessories communicated readiness, respect, and identity, even while voyaging through rough conditions. Conclusion. Travel and seafaring clothing illustrate the Vikings' marriage of function and identity. Every layer, fastener, and accessory was considered. Wool for warmth, linen for moisture control, leather for durability, and fur for insulation. Clothing allowed mobility, protection, and self-expression, whether rowing a ship, walking long distances, or trading in foreign lands. Adaptability, layering, and careful maintenance ensured survival while preserving social signaling and cultural norms. In the next chapter, we will explore clothing in battle and defense, examining how Vikings adapted everyday garments for combat, the integration of armor, and the use of clothing for mobility, protection, and intimidation. Step onto the Viking battlefield, where clothing became not just a reflection of identity and status, but a critical component of protection and survival. The Vikings were pragmatic warriors, integrating their daily garments with armor and accessories designed to withstand combat while allowing mobility, flexibility, and endurance. Base layers and mobility. Even in battle, Vikings relied on practical base layers. Tunic and trousers, wool tunics, and linen undertunics provided a flexible foundation. Tunics were loose enough to allow freedom of movement, essential for wielding weapons, dodging blows, or climbing during raids. Trousers, secured with leg bindings, prevented interference with boots or armor. Footwear. Sturdy leather boots protected feet on uneven terrain and during shipboard boarding actions. Flexible soles allowed movement across various surfaces, from forest paths to wet decks. Belts and fasteners. Belts secured weapons, pouches, and small tools. Brooches and pins kept garments snug, preventing loose fabric from snagging during combat. Base layers were not only functional but also prepared the body for additional armor or protective clothing. Comfort, moisture control, and flexibility were essential for extended campaigns or sudden skirmishes. Armor, protection without encumbrance. Viking armor varied according to status, resources, and role. Helmets. Contrary to popular myths, Vikings did not wear horned helmets in battle. Helmets were simple, often conical or rounded, made of iron or reinforced leather. A nose guard or simple metal band provided facial protection. Helmets were designed to deflect blows while maintaining vision and hearing. Mail and padded armor. Wealthier warriors could afford chainmail shirts or padded gambesons. Mail offered protection against cuts and stabs while remaining relatively flexible. Gambesons, thick quilted garments, absorbed impact and were often worn beneath or in place of mail. Shields. While not a garment, shields were integral to combat attire. Round shields were strapped to the arm or hand, often painted or decorated to reflect personal or familial identity. The shield, combined with layered clothing, enhanced defense without restricting movement. For those without access to extensive armor, reinforced clothing served as protection. Wool tunics could be layered or felted to absorb blows. Leather aprons or strips added localized protection for chest or shoulders. Cloaks, when wrapped tightly, could shield from arrows or cuts at close range. Battle accessories. Accessories played functional and symbolic roles. Belts held swords, knives, and small pouches, keeping weapons accessible. Gloves or wrapped hands protected against rope burns, weapon grips, and cold during long campaigns. Hoods and caps provided warmth without restricting visibility, essential during raids in northern winters. Even jewelry and decoration served psychological purposes in combat. Brooches, rings, and painted shields could intimidate opponents or signal affiliation. A carefully arranged beard, braids, or war paint added to the warrior's presence on the battlefield. Children and youth training. Young Vikings often trained for battle from an early age. Scaled-down tunics and trousers allowed practice in agility and handling tools or weapons. Simple leather or felt armor mimicked adult protection. Helmets, shields, or padded vests helped them learn movement, defense, and resilience. Through clothing and protective gear, children learned both practical skills and the cultural significance of warrior identity. Seasonal and environmental considerations. Combat clothing had to adapt to weather and terrain. Winter campaigns demanded heavier wool layers beneath armor, fur linings for warmth, and leather boots for traction on snow and ice. Summer raiding prioritized lightweight layers for mobility and heat management. Coastal and riverine raids required waterproof cloaks and layered wool to resist wind and spray. Vikings understood that adaptability was essential. Improperly layered garments could hinder movement or reduce survival chances. Cultural significance. Clothing in battle reflected status, wealth, and identity. Well-crafted tunics and fine wool signaled a warrior's resources and reputation. Chainmail, helmets, and decorated shields communicated readiness and skill. Personalized decoration, braids, beads, or painted symbols allowed Vikings to express individuality and familial or regional allegiance even in combat. Thus, battle attire merged practical protection with social and psychological signaling. Maintenance and care. Armor and clothing required careful upkeep. Leather was treated with oils to prevent drying or cracking. Wool tunics were aired and cleaned, ensuring warmth and durability. Metal helmets and mail were polished to prevent corrosion, ensuring readiness and safety. Maintenance reflected Viking values, preparedness, skill, and the integration of artistry and functionality in every garment. Conclusion. Clothing and armor in battle exemplify the Vikings' integration of practicality, protection, and identity. Base layers allowed mobility. Wool and leather provided insulation and durability, and helmets, mail, and reinforced clothing offered defense. Accessories and decoration communicated wealth, affiliation, and presence, while careful maintenance ensured readiness for any encounter. Through clothing, Vikings transformed functional garments into tools of survival, social signaling, and psychological strategy. In the next chapter, we will examine clothing and hygiene, exploring how Vikings managed cleanliness, grooming, and care in a world where daily labor, travel, and the climate posed constant challenges. Step into a Viking household, where the day begins with labor, meals, and family routines. Amid work, travel, and occasional raids, hygiene and clothing care were central to daily life, reflecting not only practical concerns but also cultural values. Vikings understood that clean, well-maintained garments were essential for health, comfort, and social standing. Daily hygiene practices. Vikings placed considerable importance on cleanliness, far exceeding some modern stereotypes. Washing and bathing were routine, especially when accessible. Bathing. Many settlements featured small baths, heated by fire or in saunas, and rivers or streams were used when weather permitted. A bath could occur weekly or more frequently in warmer months. Bathing helped remove sweat, dirt, and odors, maintaining skin health and comfort. Hand and face washing. Even without modern plumbing, Vikings used bowls of water, basins, or natural sources to clean hands and faces before meals or rituals. Hair care. Combing and braiding hair was common. Bone combs were widespread, used to remove lice, tangles, and dirt. Groomed hair was both hygienic and socially important. Clothing maintenance. Garments were carefully washed, mended, and stored. Linen undergarments were washed frequently, especially since they were worn close to the skin. Washing helped prevent odor and skin irritation. Wool outer garments were aired regularly. While wool could be difficult to wash, sunlight and ventilation removed odors and moisture. Leather items, including shoes, belts, and pouches, were treated with oils or smoke to prevent drying and cracking. Fur and felted garments required careful handling, brushed to maintain insulation, occasionally aired or smoked to deter pests. Vikings practiced repair and resourcefulness, mending tears with needles and thread. Even decorative elements like embroidery or beads were preserved and restored when damaged, showing both respect for the labor invested and an understanding of clothing as a long-term investment. Seasonal hygiene adjustments. Hygiene routines adjusted with the seasons. Winter, airing and partial washing sufficed, as heavy layers and cold limited water availability. Clothing layers protected from contact with dirt or sweat. Spring and summer. Frequent bathing and washing of undergarments helped manage heat and moisture. Wool and linen garments could be aired outdoors, and lighter fabrics facilitated cleaning. Autumn. Layers were inspected and repaired for winter readiness. Clothing that had accumulated dirt or wear during harvest was cleaned and mended before storage or reuse. Children and hygiene. Children were taught cleanliness and care from a young age. They participated in washing, bathing, and hair grooming. Clothing maintenance introduced responsibility. Children helped patch, mend, and air garments. Through these routines, children learned both practical skills and social norms, understanding the connection between personal hygiene, clothing, and community perception. Travel and hygiene. For Vikings on the move, hygiene was adapted to conditions. Travelers used streams, rivers, or heated baths at settlements when available. Clothing could be aired, folded, or layered to reduce odor and moisture during journeys. Gloves, cloaks, and leggings helped protect against dirt and sweat, minimizing the need for frequent washing in harsh conditions. Ceremonial and social hygiene. Clean, well-maintained clothing had social and ceremonial significance. Feasts, religious rituals, and gatherings demanded presentable garments. Muddy, torn, or unkempt clothing reflected poorly on the wearer and household. Jewelry and adornments were polished, and decorative elements carefully displayed. Proper grooming and clothing presentation demonstrated respect for hosts, participants, and tradition. Cultural attitudes. Vikings viewed hygiene and clothing care as practical, aesthetic, and moral concerns. Clean garments and personal grooming were associated with self-respect, family honor, and social standing. Neglecting hygiene could imply laziness lower status, or disregard for community norms. Attention to clothing and grooming reinforced Viking values of skill, foresight, and resourcefulness. Integration of clothing and hygiene. Hygiene practices were inseparable from clothing. Layering helped manage sweat and dirt, reducing wear on outer garments. Wool and linen's natural properties facilitated moisture control, insulation, and odor management. Careful mending, airing, and washing extended garment life, conserving valuable resources. Jewelry and accessories were maintained alongside clothing, integrating hygiene with personal presentation. Conclusion: Viking clothing and hygiene were deeply intertwined, reflecting a culture that valued cleanliness, practicality, and social awareness. Daily washing, grooming, and garment maintenance ensured comfort, health, and readiness for labor, travel, or ceremony. Clothing was not simply protective, it was a tool for managing personal presentation, signaling status, and expressing identity. Through careful attention to hygiene and clothing care, Vikings demonstrated resourcefulness, discipline, and cultural sophistication, challenging modern misconceptions of barbaric life. In the next chapter, we will examine clothing and gender distinctions, exploring how men's and women's garments differed in style, decoration, and social signaling, and how these distinctions shaped identity, roles, and expectations in Viking society. Step into the Viking village and observe the subtle yet powerful ways clothing differentiated men and women, reflecting social roles, responsibilities, and identity. While Vikings favored practical and durable garments for all, distinctions in style, decoration, and accessories conveyed gendered expectations, signaling both labor roles and social status within the community. Men's clothing function, strength, and mobility. Viking men's clothing was primarily practical, emphasizing mobility and suitability for labor, travel, and combat. Tunics, knee-length wool or linen tunics were standard. Tunics were typically plain or subtly decorated, allowing for ease of movement. Longer tunics were sometimes worn by wealthier men for ceremonial occasions. Trousers and leggings. Wool trousers or leggings, often secured with leg bindings, provided protection and mobility. Men engaged in farming, crafting, or seafaring required clothing that did not hinder strenuous activity. Cloaks and outer garments. Cloaks of wool or felted wool provided insulation, especially in northern climates. Fastened with brooches or pins, they were adjustable for weather conditions. Wealthier men might have fur-lined cloaks for both warmth and status display. Footwear. Leather shoes or boots were functional, durable, and suitable for varied terrain. Thick soles and ankle coverage were common for men who worked outdoors. Accessories and jewelry. Men wore belts, knives, and occasionally rings or simple necklaces. Jewelry indicated wealth, status, or allegiance, though generally less ornate than women's adornments. Men's clothing emphasized strength, readiness, and practicality. Decoration was restrained, allowing garments to serve as a foundation for armor, tools, or travel needs. Even ceremonial dress maintained elements of masculinity through functionality and simplicity. Women's clothing, practicality, and ornamentation. Women's garments blended utility with expressive decoration, reflecting labor responsibilities as well as social signaling. Apron dresses, layered over linen under tunics, wool apron dresses were secured with brooches at the shoulders. This style allowed freedom of movement for domestic work while enabling layering for warmth. Tunics and layers. Women wore wool tunics beneath the apron dress, sometimes with longer sleeves or higher necklines for additional coverage. Layering allowed adaptation to season, labor, or ceremonial context. Cloaks. Wool cloaks, occasionally lined with fur or trimmed decoratively, provided insulation and status signaling. Cloaks were fastened with brooches, often highly ornate, showcasing wealth or family identity. Footwear. Leather shoes or boots were functional, yet women might have decorative stitching or small embellishments. Jewelry and adornments. Women's clothing was complemented by necklaces, beads, rings, and brooches. Hair braiding and beadwork further emphasized status and identity, blending practical needs with social presentation. Women's garments were multifunctional, labor-ready but also visually communicative. Even during work, decorative touches allowed women to convey family wealth, regional identity, and cultural affiliation. In ceremonial contexts, women's clothing became highly ornate, showcasing artistic skill, trade connections, and social awareness. Children and gendered clothing. Even children's clothing reflected emerging gender roles. Boys wore scaled-down tunics and trousers, mirroring adult male labor and mobility. Girls wore miniature apron dresses and layered tunics, preparing them for domestic responsibilities and social expression. Adornments such as beads, pins, or small jewelry introduced children to gendered norms and the visual language of identity. Through clothing, children learned cultural expectations, understanding movement behavior, and the presentation associated with their gender. Functional versus decorative distinctions. While both men and women valued durability and warmth, decoration and visual signaling differed. Men's clothing emphasized simplicity, mobility, and strength suitable for labor, travel, and defense. Women's clothing combined practicality with visible ornamentation, signaling wealth, marital status, and household identity. Accessories such as belts, brooches, jewelry, and hair adornments served as gendered markers while reinforcing practical function. Ceremonial and status signaling. Ceremonial attire accentuated gender distinctions. Men might wear longer tunics, furs, or decorative belts, projecting authority, wealth, and readiness for combat or social duties. Women displayed layered fabrics, elaborate embroidery, multiple brooches, and vibrant jewelry emphasizing artistry, lineage, and household prominence. Both genders adapted color, material, and decoration according to regional norms and seasonal festivals. Regional and social variations. Gender distinctions in clothing varied by region, wealth, and occupation. Coastal or trading communities might incorporate imported fabrics, glass beads, or dyed wool into women's dress, signaling wealth or trade connections. Northern settlements emphasized durability and insulation, with fur-lined cloaks or felted wool garments for both genders. Social hierarchy influenced adornment. Elites enjoyed more elaborate decoration, while commoners prioritized functionality with subtle embellishments. Integration with daily life. Clothing reinforced gendered roles within the household and community. Men's attire supported labor, seafaring, raiding, and defense. Women's garments facilitated domestic labor, childcare, weaving, and ceremonial responsibilities. Clothing served as a tool for identity formation, signaling age, marital status, occupation, and social standing. Conclusion. Gender distinctions in Viking clothing illustrate a balance between function, identity, and social signaling. Men's garments prioritized strength, mobility, and practicality, while women's clothing combined labor readiness with expressive ornamentation. Even children's clothing reinforced cultural norms and preparation for adult roles. Through fabrics, layers, decoration, and accessories, Vikings communicated expectations, status, and identity, seamlessly integrating function with social meaning. In the next chapter, we will explore clothing in trade and cultural exchange, examining how Vikings adapted, and displayed foreign textiles, dyes, and ornamentation, reflecting their extensive trade networks and intercultural interactions. Step into Viking marketplaces and port towns where ships bring goods from distant lands, and merchants trade textiles, dyes, and ornaments. Clothing in the Viking world was not only functional and socially expressive, it was a medium for cultural exchange, reflecting the Vikings' connections across Europe, the Middle East, and even Asia. Through trade, Vikings adopted new materials, colors, and designs, enriching their garments and communicating identity and status in complex ways. Imported materials. Viking trade networks brought access to foreign fabrics and materials that complemented traditional wool, linen, and leather. Silk, imported from Byzantium or via trade routes through Eastern Europe. Silk was rare and highly prized. It appeared in ceremonial garments, trim, or small decorative elements, signaling wealth and connections. Fine linen. Though Vikings produced their own linen, imported linen could be finer, smoother, or dyed with colors unavailable locally. It was used for undergarments, tunics, or ceremonial layers. Cotton. Traded from southern regions or Middle Eastern markets, cotton was rare but appreciated for its softness and lightness in clothing or accessories. Dyed fabrics. Exotic dyes provided richer reds, blues, greens, and yellows than local plants could produce. Imported dyes allowed wealthy Vikings to demonstrate status through vivid color in tunics, cloaks, and dresses. Even small quantities of imported fabrics or dyes were significant, signaling the wearer's access to trade, wealth, and far-reaching networks. Designs and patterns. Viking garments also reflected foreign stylistic influence. Striped or checked patterns may have been inspired by imported fabrics, enhancing local weaves with new visual effects. Embroidery techniques incorporated motifs or stitching styles observed in distant cultures, enriching local clothing aesthetics. Jewelry integration. Imported beads, metal pendants, and glass items were incorporated into clothing, adding texture, color, and prestige. These design adaptations merged local tradition with foreign inspiration, creating garments that were both functional and visually expressive of cultural awareness. Trade and status signaling. Clothing acquired through trade conveyed social and economic information. Wearing imported fabrics or vibrant colors demonstrated wealth and the ability to access distant goods. Imported jewelry or embellishments signaled trade connections, family alliances, and regional influence. Clothing functioned as a language of prestige, readable by other Vikings and foreign visitors alike. Even during travel, ceremonial events, or feasting, garments with foreign components projected cosmopolitan identity and reinforced social hierarchy. Adapting foreign influence. Vikings did not merely copy foreign clothing, they adapted it to local needs. Fabrics were layered with traditional wool or linen for warmth and durability. Designs were simplified or altered for daily labor or seafaring requirements. Imported dyes were combined with local textiles to produce hybrid patterns suitable for Scandinavian climate and lifestyle. This adaptation demonstrates Viking ingenuity, combining aesthetic influence with practicality and survival needs. Cultural exchange through accessories. Clothing and accessories served as vectors for cultural exchange. Beads. Glass beads from the Middle East or Byzantine regions were incorporated into necklaces, brooches, or hair adornments. Metalwork. Silver or bronze ornaments reflected foreign styles while integrating with local costume traditions. Patterns and symbols. Motifs observed in foreign textiles, such as geometric designs or floral elements, were adapted for embroidery, weaving, and decorative trim. By combining imported elements with local practices, Vikings created clothing that told a story of movement, contact, and exchange across regions. Children and trade influence. Even children's clothing reflected these influences. Beads, small brooches, or patterned fabrics introduced children to cultural and social literacy. Learning to wear and care for such garments prepared them for adult roles in trade, travel, and community identity. Children's garments reinforced social learning, combining functionality, local tradition, and foreign inspiration. Trade and practicality. While imported textiles were prestigious, Vikings balanced function and aesthetics. Wool remained essential for warmth and durability. Linen provided comfort and moisture management. Imported materials were integrated where practical, often reserved for ceremonial or displayed purposes rather than labor-intensive work. This balance ensured that clothing remained adaptable to the northern climate, labor needs, and social signaling, even while embracing new materials and styles. Conclusion: clothing in trade and cultural exchange reveals the Vikings' openness, adaptability, and cosmopolitan awareness. Imported fabrics, dyes, and designs enriched local garments, allowing for expression of wealth, status, and identity. Through careful adaptation, Vikings integrated foreign materials into practical, functional clothing suited to northern climates, daily labor, and ceremonial life. Clothing thus became a vehicle for both survival and social communication, reflecting the dynamic interplay of local tradition and global connection. In the next chapter, we will explore clothing for rituals and religious occasions, examining how garments were used to signal devotion, role, and cultural symbolism during sacred events. Step into the sacred space of a Viking ritual, where firelight dances across carved wooden idols, smoke curls from incense or burning herbs, and the community gathers to honor God's ancestors or seasonal cycles. In these moments, clothing became more than practical protection or social signaling. It became a medium for spiritual expression, devotion, and ritual performance. The garments Vikings chose for sacred occasions reflected status, role, and reverence, blending function with symbolic meaning. The role of clothing in rituals. In Viking society, clothing for rituals served multiple purposes: identification of roles. Priests, chieftains, and ceremonial participants wore distinctive garments to signal authority and responsibility within the ritual. Symbolism, colors, materials, and adornments conveyed meaning, invoking divine favor, representing lineage, or marking seasonal cycles. Community cohesion. Coordinated clothing styles reinforced social norms and unity, visually distinguishing participants from observers or the broader community. Priestly and ceremonial garments. Those leading rituals, such as Goda priests or chieftains, often wore distinctive and symbolic attire. Tunic and cloak, high-quality wool or linen, sometimes dyed in significant colors like deep blue, red, or natural earth tones, marked authority. Cloaks could be fastened with ornate brooches or pins, occasionally accented with fur for status and warmth. Ornamentation, embroidery, symbols, or patterned trim represented divine affiliation, familial identity, or ritual significance. Headgear and accessories, caps, hoods, or simple circlets distinguished leaders. Staffs, belts, and pouches carried ritual tools, enhancing both function and symbolism. Even these garments were practical enough to allow movement, gesture, or participation in outdoor rites, balancing ceremonial display with physical necessity. Participant clothing. Members of the community participating in rituals adapted everyday garments for sacred purpose. Wool tunics, apron dresses, or layered clothing were often cleaned and aired for the occasion. Decorative elements, such as brooches, necklaces, or beads, were emphasized to show respect and social participation. Children wore miniature versions of adult ritual attire, introducing them to communal roles, symbolism, and gendered expectations. The layering and preparation of clothing reinforced ritual readiness, signaling care, devotion, and adherence to tradition. Colors, materials, and symbolism. Colors and materials held symbolic importance in religious contexts. Red, often associated with vitality, blood offerings, or protection. Blue and green, linked to fertility, sea, and nature cycles. White or undyed linen represented purity or ritual cleanliness, commonly used in sacred ceremonies or for undergarments. Material choices reinforced symbolism. Fine wool and linen reflected respect for the divine, while furs indicated status or connection to the natural world. Imported silks or dyed fabrics could elevate ceremonial garments, displaying wealth and reverence through the investment of valuable materials. Seasonal and contextual variation. Ritual attire adapted to season, location, and type of ceremony. Winter rituals. Heavy wool, felted cloaks, and fur-lined garments maintained warmth during outdoor ceremonies. ensuring participants could remain present and focused. Spring and summer rites, lighter tunics, and breathable fabrics accommodated outdoor labor or extended gatherings, with color and decoration emphasized for visual impact. Funerals and memorials, clothing choices were subdued, favoring muted colors or simpler adornments, reflecting solemnity and respect. Clothing thus provided both practical protection and ritual context, linking the physical and spiritual experience. Children and ceremonial learning. Children's participation in rituals introduced them to cultural knowledge through clothing. Miniature garments mirrored adult ceremonial attire. Adornments and color-coded layers taught symbolism and social roles. Wearing ritual clothing reinforced discipline, respect, and understanding of communal values. Through clothing, children learned not only practical skills but also cultural literacy, linking personal appearance with spiritual and social norms. Integration with accessories. Ritual clothing was enhanced by functional and symbolic accessories. Brooches, pins, and belts secured garments while indicating status. Beads, necklaces, or rings could denote family, trade connections, or divine favor. Staffs, knives, or ritual tools were carried as part of the ensemble, integrating physical utility with ceremonial symbolism. Accessories reinforced the visual and symbolic narrative, turning clothing into a storytelling medium within the ritual space. Care and respect. Ritual clothing required special care. Garments were cleaned, aired, and mended in advance to show respect. Decorative elements were polished and arranged deliberately. Clothing maintenance was a form of ritual preparation, reflecting mindfulness, reverence, and adherence to cultural practice. The act of preparing clothing itself became part of the ritual, linking care, devotion, and participation. Conclusion. Clothing for rituals and religious occasions illustrates how the Vikings transformed practical garments into instruments of cultural expression and spiritual engagement. Through layers, materials, colors, decoration, and accessories, clothing communicated role, devotion, and identity within sacred spaces. Garments were simultaneously functional, symbolic, and social, creating a tangible connection between the physical world, the divine, and the community. In the next chapter, we will explore the evolution and legacy of Viking clothing, examining how these garments influenced later European dress, how archaeological finds illuminate construction and style, and how modern reconstructions bring the Viking wardrobe to life today. The Viking Age, spanning roughly from 800 to 1100 CE, was a period of dynamic adaptation and regional innovation in clothing. While wool, linen, and leather remained the core fabrics, Vikings developed increasingly sophisticated techniques to enhance both durability and comfort. Felting, weaving, and layering became more refined, allowing garments to endure harsh northern climates while also conveying social status and identity. Functional evolution over time. Layering for survival. Early Viking clothing relied on basic layers: a linen undertunic, a wool outer tunic, and leather shoes. Over time, Vikings experimented with multiple wool layers, felted wool for wind resistance, and reinforced seams. This evolution reflects a deep understanding of insulation, ventilation, and moisture management in varying climates. Tailoring and fit. Archaeological evidence indicates a gradual shift toward more fitted tunics and trousers, allowing greater mobility for labor and seafaring. The cut of garments evolved to balance freedom of movement with protection from the elements. Seasonal adaptations. Clothing evolved to address extreme variations in temperature. Winter garments became heavier, incorporating fur lining, while summer attire focused on breathability and moisture control. The development of these specialized garments shows Vikings' sophisticated approach to environmental challenges. Regional variations and cultural identity. Clothing also reflected regional identity, influenced by available materials, climate, and local culture. Coastal settlements, greater access to imported fabrics, and dyes allowed coastal Vikings to incorporate finer linen, cotton, and occasional silk into ceremonial or high-status clothing. Fishing and seafaring communities favored waterproof wool, layered cloaks, and leather boots. Inland communities, interior villages focused on durable wool and linen for everyday wear, often using felted layers and leather reinforcements for labor-intensive tasks like farming or hunting. Northern versus Southern Scandinavia. In the far north, furs and heavier wool dominated, while southern communities sometimes had access to lighter, more decorative fabrics through trade networks, reflecting a subtle blend of practicality and prestige. Integration of trade and imported influence. Trade profoundly impacted the evolution of Viking clothing. Silk and colored fabrics, imported silk from Byzantium or the Middle East, as well as dyed textiles from European trade partners, expanded the Viking palette. While used sparingly due to cost, such fabrics elevated garments for ceremonial and display purposes. Beads and metal adornments. Jewelry and beads often traveled alongside textiles. These decorative elements were sewn into clothing, signaling wealth, foreign connections, or religious significance. Hybrid styles. Vikings adapted foreign patterns, weaving techniques, and decorative motifs to local clothing, creating hybrid garments that blended utility with aesthetic sophistication. Influence on medieval European dress. The Viking legacy persisted beyond their era. Tunics and layering. The basic structure of tunics, layered over undergarments, influenced medieval Scandinavian and broader European fashion. Cloaks and fasteners. Brooches and pins inspired by Viking designs were integrated into later medieval attire as both functional fasteners and decorative elements. Social signaling. The principle of using clothing to indicate status, wealth, or occupation continued in Northern European societies, rooted in Viking practices. Archaeological evidence and insights. Modern understanding of Viking clothing derives largely from archaeological finds. Burial sites. Well-preserved graves reveal layered clothing, carefully folded textiles, and placement of jewelry, indicating intentional presentation even in death. Textile fragments. Analysis of wool, linen, and silk fragments provides insights into weaving techniques, thread counts, and dye use. Tools and craftsmanship. Surviving needles, spindle whorls, and looms illustrate the sophistication of textile production, confirming that Viking clothing was both functional and artistic. Legacy in modern reenactment and education. Today, Viking clothing inspires historical reenactment, museums, and educational programs. Reconstructed garments demonstrate authentic layering, fabric selection, and accessory use. Workshops on weaving, felting, and sewing preserve traditional skills. Reenactments, while sometimes influenced by media stereotypes, offer practical insight into how Vikings dressed for work, travel, and ceremony. Lessons for contemporary understanding. Viking clothing teaches several enduring lessons. 1. Function and identity intertwined. Garments served survival needs while communicating social identity and status. 2. Adaptation and innovation. Climate, activity, and trade drove continual innovation in materials and construction techniques. 3. Sustainability and resourcefulness. Careful maintenance, repair, and layering maximized garment longevity. 4. Cultural expression. Clothing was a medium for storytelling, status, and connection to wider trade networks, children, and intergenerational knowledge. Clothing also transmitted practical and cultural knowledge. Children learned to dress appropriately for weather and activity. They practiced sewing, mending, and textile care, preparing for adult responsibilities. Garments taught social roles, gender distinctions, and ceremonial expectations, reinforcing community values through everyday practice. Conclusion. The evolution and legacy of Viking clothing underscore a culture of ingenuity, adaptability, and social sophistication. From functional daily wear to ceremonial attire influenced by trade networks, clothing embodied the Viking balance of practicality, identity, and aesthetic expression. Archaeology, historical research, and modern reconstruction illuminate these garments, connecting us to a vivid cultural heritage that continues to inspire scholarship, craftsmanship, and popular imagination. In the final chapter, we will examine modern perceptions and myths of Viking clothing, exploring how horned helmets, cinematic depictions, and stylized costumes diverge from historical reality, and how historical evidence corrects these enduring misconceptions. Step into the world of popular imagination, where Vikings are often portrayed wearing horned helmets, oversized furs, and theatrical, dramatic attire. While these images are widespread in films, television, and illustrations, historical evidence paints a very different picture. Understanding Viking clothing requires distinguishing myth from reality, appreciating the historical sophistication of their garments while acknowledging how modern storytelling has reshaped public perception. The horned helmet myth, one of the most enduring misconceptions, is the belief that Vikings wore horned helmets in battle. Historical evidence, archaeological finds, and burial sites indicate that Viking helmets were practical, typically conical or rounded, constructed from iron or reinforced leather, and sometimes equipped with a nose guard. There is no evidence of horns being used in combat. Origins of the myth. The image of horned helmets became popular in the 19th century through Romantic art, theatrical productions, and the operas of Richard Wagner. These artistic interpretations prioritized visual drama over historical accuracy. Practical considerations. Horns on helmets would have been cumbersome, impractical, and potentially dangerous in combat. Real Viking helmets emphasized protection, visibility, and mobility. Understanding this myth helps clarify the distinction between historical fact and cultural imagination, highlighting the importance of relying on archaeological and textual evidence. Other common misrepresentations. Viking clothing is often stylized or exaggerated in media. Excessive fur and leather. While furs were used particularly for warmth or ceremonial purposes, everyday garments relied on wool, linen, and leather. Modern depictions often overemphasize fur for dramatic effect. Sexualized or fantastical designs. Female clothing is frequently depicted as revealing, despite historical evidence showing practical, layered garments designed for mobility and modesty. Uniformity stereotypes. Media often portrays Vikings in identical outfits, ignoring the reality of regional variation, social hierarchy, and seasonal adaptation. These misrepresentations create cultural stereotypes, obscuring the nuanced reality of Viking life and dress. Archaeology corrects misconceptions. Archaeological discoveries and textile analysis provide accurate insights into Viking clothing. Textile fragments, wool, linen, and imported silk fragments reveal weaving techniques, dye use, and garment construction. Burial garments. Well-preserved graves show carefully layered clothing, arranged accessories, and gender-specific attire. Accessories and jewelry, brooches, beads, and pins illustrate how Vikings fashioned clothing and expressed social status. Through these findings, historians reconstruct garments that were practical, socially meaningful, and regionally diverse, countering myths perpetuated by popular culture. Modern reenactment and reconstruction. Historical reenactments and museum reconstructions bring Viking clothing to life. Authentic materials, wool, linen, and leather are used to replicate tunics, apron dresses, cloaks, and accessories. Functional layering. Reconstructed garments demonstrate the practical layering techniques Vikings used for warmth, mobility, and adaptability. Decorative elements. Beads, brooches, and embroidery are recreated to illustrate social signaling, trade influence, and artistic expression. These reconstructions educate the public, allowing people to appreciate the balance of function and aesthetics in Viking dress. Cultural imagination and myth. While historically inaccurate, Myths serve cultural and narrative purposes. Dramatic images like horned helmets capture imagination and inspire storytelling. Stylized clothing in media and art contributes to tourism, festivals, and popular interest in Viking history. Recognizing these myths alongside historical evidence encourages critical thinking and appreciation for the true complexity of Viking life. Lessons for historical understanding. Modern perceptions highlight key points. 1. Evidence-based analysis. Archaeology and historical records provide accurate insights into garments and accessories. 2. Cultural reinterpretation. Popular imagery often reflects artistic choices rather than historical fact. 3. Practicality and expression. Real Viking clothing was functional, adaptable, and socially expressive. 4. Integration of myth and history. Appreciating Vikings involves understanding both the evidence and how cultural imagination shapes our perception. Educational and public engagement. Efforts to correct misconceptions include museum exhibits. Authentic clothing reconstructions highlight accuracy in fabric layering and adornment. Workshops and demonstrations. Weaving, sewing, and clothing maintenance are showcased to teach historical skills. Publications and media. Scholars provide context to distinguish historical garments from cinematic fantasy. These initiatives ensure that Viking clothing is appreciated in its historical context, rather than reduced to stereotypes or theatrical exaggeration. Conclusion. Modern perceptions and myths of Viking clothing illustrate the tension between historical reality and cultural imagination, while horned helmets and exaggerated fur continue to capture the public imagination. Evidence from archaeology, textile analysis, and contemporary accounts shows that Viking garments were practical, durable, layered, and socially expressive. Clothing was not mere costume. It was a tool for survival, a medium for identity, and a canvas for cultural expression. By separating fact from fiction, we honor the Vikings' ingenuity, artistry, and cultural sophistication, gaining a richer, more nuanced understanding of their world. From daily wear to ceremonial dress, their clothing reflects a society that valued function, beauty, and social communication, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire fascination and study today.